educators. And she's a fantastic researcher, speaker, and person. Without further ado, Penny Hay, here we go.
Thank you, Vlad. Well, we made it. What an amazing group of people to spend a week with. And I did think, is this the graveyard slot? I don't think so. I think it's a celebration of all these brilliant minds and thinkers in the room. So welcome, everyone. I designed this presentation for you as a gift. It's highly visual, it's multimodal, and it just asks lots of questions. It doesn't necessarily give any answers, but it is a kind of creative provocation, if you like. And I draw on a lot of work and in partnership with many of you in the room as well. So this beautiful image is from Robert Macfarlane's new book, River, and I like the quote from Tanya Kovacs, who's one of my dear friends, artists. She's now at Dundee, not at Bar Spa, but we still work together. We all have a river running through us. So just have a think about that phrase as I take you on a journey. So I am absolutely delighted and honoured to work alongside Vlad. We met 4 years ago online in a weird breakout room when I was an avatar. I would think I was a unicorn, and reached out to Vlad and said, hey, you're good. Can we work together? And so we have for 4 years. And we only met on Monday for the first time. But yeah, it shows how friendships can absolutely thrive in the digital space as well. And I feel as though I know his million children, and Constance now as well. So we've been working, many of you came to the session yesterday, and we've been working on a research group with 10 or 11 artists, educators, environmentalists, social psychologists, researchers, etc., on the concept of collective ecological imagination. And our journal article has been accepted into the International Journal of Art and Design Education, the special issue of Imagination, which I happen to be co-editing, but it was peer-reviewed by someone else, just to reassure you. So more of that later. So I'm very good friends with Bayo Akinmolafe, and he is a real activist, a post-humanist, a poet, a public intellectual, and he talks about finding the cracks, finding those ruptures, finding those creative disruptions for new spaces of possibility. And even before I'd met Vlad, I'd written a paper called Spaces of Possibility. So I want you to think about his phrase, which Kerry referred to the other day, these times are urgent, let us slow down. And I want you to think about your forest. We all have forests in the mind. The other day, we were lucky to hear from Johan, and he lent on Franz Bloch's beautiful piece about dreams. And just to quote one sentence, we walk in the forest and feel we are or might be what the forest is dreaming. So I want you to just have a think about from your own context. You can either take this image with you in your mind, or you can close your eyes and think of your own forest or your own metaphor of a forest. So together we're imagining with the wild. I invite you all to dream in the forest, to wander and wonder, immersed in the sensations of the forest ecology. Everything is connected. The forest is infinite and illuminating, full of freedom and potential. Our imagination gives us insight and guides us to dream, to be intuitive, sensitive, and open to possibility. We inhabit this space of possibility and imagining. Immersed in the forest, we're sensitized, we tune in. Our collective ecological imagination invites us to reimagine alternative worlds and more hopeful futures. So today is an invitation to sensitize and cultivate our collective imaginations as a possibility practice. at this conference in particular. And I'm asking these questions to me, to you, to everyone, and there are many, many more. So how does our understanding of collective imagination enable new possibilities to emerge in the world? How can we practice a way of learning and knowing together that explores concepts of ecological imagination? And how can we think more deeply about pedagogy in relation to our own and our collective ecological imagination? I was just, when I was playing with this, it's really like an artwork, if you like. I was thinking about more than, I won't leave you out over here. I was thinking about more than human worlds. I was thinking about humans in the more than human world. The idea of nature, the contested nature of nature and ecology, wondering and wandering, curiosity and awe, flow, not knowing. As an artist, not knowing and uncertainty are absolutely vital. Possibility, reflecting constantly, imagining otherwise, imagining the other, and around creative, imaginative inquiry. And I'm very influenced by, I fell down the rabbit hole in my PhD and met Deleuze and Guattari, not in person sadly. So the three ecologies around mind, society and environment are really important to my framing. And also talking with colleagues across the global south, the global east, and thinking about the indigenous wisdom of forests, the cyclical nature of seasons and life cycles, of rituals and interconnectedness, that it's holistic and synchronous. It's about past, present, and future existence simultaneously. So we're thinking about our ancestors and our future generations in the same dream time and in other worlds and making other worlds. I was so inspired by Eleanor's talk yesterday. So I'm just putting a few provocations out here, and in relation to education in particular, obviously I'm an artist, researcher, educator, but education has been my kind of lifelong question, and I think we need to ask better questions of education and who education is for. Thank you, Eleanor, for that today. So to invite particularly children, young people, but all of us, to fall in love with nature, to think on behalf of the planet, to nurture that nature connection, environmental awareness and social action as ecological citizens. I think that is really inspiring, to think about the planet, that we are part of the planet, we are nature, we are the forest. And to explore climate education issues through being and thinking, relating, collaborating and acting. So the inner development goals, not necessarily the sustainable development goals. So this all started, it started when the national curriculum came in, by the way. So I trained in fine art and education, and then I was going to do a master's in drawing, which was my specialism, but I had a brain hemorrhage, and I had to learn everything again. And my tutor said, don't do a master's in drawing, Penny. You do that every day anyway. Do it in education. We need people like you that are thinking on the edge. So I did a master's in art education. I specialised in children and young people that didn't want to go to school, and I re-engaged them in their learning through the arts in particular. But like Bill said yesterday, creativity is in everything. It's a way of being in the world. It's not just in the arts. But the arts manifest that on a daily basis. So long story short, because it's a long journey, I won't tell you my age, but I worked as a teacher and in alternative education, in early years primary, special, secondary. I worked in southwestern Glasgow and then ended up in London for 10 years, where I worked at the Institute of Education at Goldsmiths, and I was lucky to work at Tate Modern for 2 years before it opened. So my daily practice has continued, which is to set up experimental sites of learning and research them alongside children and young people, and hopefully sites of pedagogical innovation, hopefully. So, because I'd been very ill in my early days for various other reasons, I've nearly died several times, so I do feel like a cat. But I then was told I couldn't have children. And then Lily came along. Don't use her name on social media, by the way. So my daughter came along when I was nearly 40. She's 23 now, and she's just graduated from Goldsmiths. And I had to move back to Bath because my partner was stubborn and wouldn't move to London. And I brought her up with my work. So as a part-timer, I've always been part-time. And I set up a charity that was called 5x5 because we started with 5 artists, 5 galleries, 5 schools, and then 24 years later, it's now called House of Imagination in memory of Sir Ken Robinson, who was my dear friend and mentor I worked with for many years. And asking children deep philosophical questions about their learning. So here the children are posing those questions as artists. How do we bring the inside outside? How do we bring the outside inside? How big does a map have to be inside it? I'm sure that was a Borges paragraph. Or even a book. So that concept of, so here's Lily. You know, she inspired me. She wandered in the forest. She got lost in the forest. She still does. She's a real eco-warrior. And that whole idea of wonder and awe with children, you know, we learn like a forest and everything's connected, as Nora Bateson says. And so working over the 24 years, I've just experimented with the concept of children as artists in the world, of the world, with the world. So, I mean, eat your heart out, Giuseppe Pannoni on the top left there. But just thinking about the idea that we're learning through inquiry in multimodalities, as Nora Bateson says, in transcontextual mutual cooperation, community. And I think it's really important that we're not siloed and packaged in our learning. And the inspiration from nature at the beginning of children's lives stays with them if we're taking care together in the more than human world. So a lot of these themes around materiality, around post-human, new materialist kind of methodologies really have informed my work. And thinking through the idea of the role of the adult alongside the child. So as a companion in learning, documenting their learning, listening, noticing, really connecting to what's next, because they tell you, they have agency. And so the inspiration of artists working alongside in a community with educators, researchers, cultural practitioners, creative professionals is really important as inspiration, as role models. So here on the top of Salisbury Hill in Bath, the children trekked up to the top, met these beautiful rabbits designed by Edwina Bridgman, just made out of found materials. There's a lot of our work where we prioritise using all found, reclaimed and sustainable materials. And just having that provocation for the rest of the term as a story that unfolded, how do we tell a story without words, was their question. And one of the children said, they were back at the school, we were talking about being an artist, and this child jumped up in fizzy learning and said, I love being an artist. And I asked her to just write down what she said in the moment. And she said, yes, 5 things about being an artist. Have a good imagination, and then you have great ideas. Be positive and don't worry if you make mistakes. Be good at playing. Be thoughtful. Art's about everything. And in terms of my PhD, that was the quote that really drove I worked with the same group of children for 5 years and documented all their learning and really understood then how the kind of repertoire, if you like, of pedagogical characteristics, what you do in that dance around children's learning is so vital. And it's about respect, and it's about trust and following children's fascinations. So learning is all about inquiry. And asking the children about what they think about their imagination. You know, when you let your mind go free, imagination's only a colourful blackness from which every idea spawns. It's what you imagine. It's the machine that allows you to float outside the box, to believe the impossible. You've got to believe in imagination. If you don't, you wouldn't have dreams. These are beautiful. This was a book co-produced with David Armand, the author, called, funnily enough, The House of Imagination. We changed our name because of Ken Robinson, and I keep thinking about all of his 10 C's. He lived out daily through all of his work. The hardest letter I ever had to write was to his bedside when he was dying, but just to thank him for this beautiful work that he brought to the world. And then thinking with children about, so what is ecological imagination? How do we curate the blue and green of the city? How can we share that? These are 8-year-olds. How can we share that with the world? How can we tell them what we think about Bath as a landscape city, as a city of imagination? So Forest for Imagination is the project I just want to focus in on and just pull out some of the kind of questions that I keep having. So it's a research project, it's a long-term research public engagement project which offers an alternative approach to creative learning. And it is, using Hilary's phrase, we came about it separately, but we believe in it together, rewilding education in these spaces of possibility. So we work alongside artists, creative professionals, alongside the creative, cultural, educational community in the city. And we're on the move. We've been invited to other places now and also other countries. And I'm lucky to work with the brilliant Andrew Grant, who set up Grant Associates 26 years ago, maybe 30 years ago soon. And he is the designer of the super trees in Singapore, Gardens by the Bay. And his mantra is putting nature and imagination at the heart of design. So Forest is now in its 11th year. So you can see his beautiful super trees as inspiration, but each year we take over a familiar space and we reimagine it with the community. So, and it's all ages, so my bottom left, my students who are still working with me 11 years on, I now pay them, one of them as a lead designer. The bottom right, my PGC, postgraduate certificate in education students, I run the arts specialism where they have live projects to get involved in. So it's a very flat level kind of public pedagogy, if you like. I have various phrases depending on which day of the week I'm talking about it. And the inspiration for the very first forest came from the bowerbird. So just the idea that we're kind of co-creating these spaces inspired by nature. And Andrew talks, he's an international speaker, he talks around the world about forests as a creative ecosystem, a space for art and participation. And each year we ask the children and young people questions. If you were a tree, what would you be? I might ask you that in a minute. And each year we have a theme. So this particular year we took over the space inside and outside the Abbey in Bath, where we were focusing on saving the baobabs and the blue-eyed black lemurs in Madagascar. And Andrew has now got a research centre in Madagascar where he's literally saving the baobabs and the blue-eyed black lemurs. And so we created these dens for children to explore in a multimodal way. And inside the Abbey, it was actually, I'm going to be slightly political here because I realise I'm not being filmed, so that's great. I can get away with saying things like, this was the year of Brexit. So this is 1,000 butterflies with everybody on the move, everybody welcome. And we work closely with Bath Welcomes Refugees, Bristol Welcomes Refugees, in co-designing the whole project. So we work with Field and Craig Bradbury Studios, architects, working with children here to co-design these beautiful houses of imagination, and then thinking about curating the spaces across the city. This was in 2018 with three-way special school, 180 children with complex and multiple special rights, but also with one-to-one adult staff care. So we co-designed the whole event with an emphasis on research and exploration. So a drawing maze, 1,000 trees made of clay, some drawing machines made by my art students, and a performance space for the children. One child who could only blink, and she was in a flatbed wheelchair, and so it was really all for her. And then in 2019 at the Holborn, we had 10,000 people over 5 days. 20 schools visiting, and intergenerational, everybody welcome. It's always free. I have more words in my fundraising folder than my PhD, sadly, and I'm not always successful, and that is an issue. But we also worked with WOMAD this year, the World of Music, Art and Dance. We worked with various organisations around the city to bring the Holborn Gardens and Sydney Gardens inside and out to life, always thinking about ecological imagination. So thinking here, when the pandemic hit, we were going to rewild the Forum, which is an Art Deco cinema in Bath, but instead we pivoted to a digital space. And we thought together about the different modalities that we could share to think about how we stay connected in our Zoom rooms, and how we, I think that was probably about when I met you, Vlad, how we connect together in that kind of universal space, thinking together out about the metaphor of the forest. So we teamed up with Chris Anderson from TED, and we had a 24-hour online event. It was mad, a bit like this week. And the whole idea of bringing together international collaborators across the world. So we worked with Earth Songs, we worked in Zimbabwe with Trees of Hope, and the Little Sun Project with Olafur Eliasson, who we're now working with. And taking over meanwhile spaces. So we were given the gardens at the assembly rooms. We were given the gardens at the American Museum. We were playing with self-directed inquiry with the children, so that all the materials were self-led and they were in charge of their learning. They had agency. They had permission. And then a phone call from the director of the Egg. She said, "Help, Penny, I've got an empty theatre." Sorry, I'm ignoring you over here. I'm not going to ignore you. "We've got an empty theatre. What can we do?" And I said, "Easy, put a forest inside." So we took over the whole theatre, and we co-designed the event with Andrew Amundsen, who's his back to us on the right, and thinking about how we then bring a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary space into the Egg Theatre to then celebrate children's learning. So to take a phrase from Joseph Beuys, every classroom is a work of art. Every modality is valued, the space between all of the art forms, but also across the whole curriculum. And also we were going beyond the curriculum. Because this isn't film, when the national curriculum came in, I was working with children who didn't want to go to school. It excluded children or disaffected students. And so I pulped all the national curriculum documents and made them into sketchbooks for the children. And then we took over spaces. So this is the Society for the Protection of Magical Creatures, an immersive environment at the top of the theatre, where Lucy Cassidy here, one of our artists, who I've worked with for 20 years, really thinking about inviting the children to adopt a creature, to look after it, to think about how then their own ecological imagination comes into play. And it was so successful that we were also invited back. So the second iteration of the Living Tree, Andrew Amundsen is in Berlin with Olafur Eliasson and Wim Wenders. And we worked with Alf Coles, a dear friend who's mathematician artist at the University of Bristol. We co-designed the Living Tree Mirror Maze. So I'm just going to show you a short film. It's only a minute or two. I'm not quite sure about which one to hit here. I presume it's just the next button.
you don't need a whole country, you don't need a whole continent, you don't need it, you can change the world.
It's on our website if the sound was a little bit challenging, so apologies for that. But we only had £500 to make the film, which is fine. And then last year we were invited back to the beautiful assembly rooms in Bath, 250 years old, and it was a meanwhile space because the National Trust had just taken it over. So they allowed us to take over this incredible space, and we invited the whole community and more to assemble in the forest. So Morag Myerscough worked with the community to elicit their ideas around ecological citizenship, about how we can think on behalf of nature. We need to act now. We need to have hope and act now. I think that was the message that's coming out this week very strongly. And I think in the face of the ecological emergency, the biodiversity emergency, shining a light on not only the importance of global forests, but also our local biodiversity. So Andrew Grant designed this beautiful beaver's den, the site of the broken arm, Vlad. I broke my arm, which is why I couldn't go to Dublin. A child leapt up in their learning in front of me, and I had to choose to jump over him or crush his hand, and I jumped, and he said I was flying like a kingfisher. Fine. But it was, an 8 months in a clamp, but I learned a lot. But inviting the children into that space, we'd had 1,000 grasses in the ballroom. We worked with Frances Ginn on kind of making a public erasure, rubbing out the beautiful hedgehogs that she had drawn to understand that we were getting rid of these beautiful creatures, and inviting actions from early years settings right through to elders. Working with Bath refugees community, we set up a community kitchen, and we invited the whole community to think together about what we could do to take those acts. And then just the last thing that I want to share with you before we open up for questions is this year's work, which has just finished. So I literally closed the forest on the 30th of June, went to lie down in a forest for a week in Wales, and then came here. So we were invited back to the Holborn Museum because they love us, and our theme was Biodiversity Ring. So we were thinking about the million small acts that we could take every day to make a difference, and thinking together as a community. And it was just a joyous experience. We didn't get our Arts Council funding because the Arts Council, we met their meeting when the budget had been used up. And so we just asked the community for support, and our university stepped up and underwrote the project, as well as my lovely friend Naomi Lord over there, who provided some extra funding through the Global Youth Fund, and working with young people in Bath, young people in Bolton. So we worked with beautiful, beautiful performances with Anki, Ortega Theatre, working with the Egg from Catalonia around climate change, a beautiful immersive experience. We worked with the Kilter Theatre group in Bath, and they created a Mother Nature's Supper Club with children and young people. We had an Adobe takeover with our university creative campus ambassadors, and had live co-designing of digital forests of imagination. And then Naomi may want to talk about this later, but the young people actually thinking about the kind of the Earth ballot, the Earth vote, and representing their ideas as a live project in action in the city that they then took back to Bolton. So this is a kind of future project that we're working on. So just to end then, that what we're trying to do together as a community is really distill the essence of an alternative way of teaching learning, that it doesn't have to be a delivered packaged experience. It should be immersive, multimodal. It should be experimental and aesthetic. It's really about aesthetic justice. And I think it is work that optimises that sense of freedom and agency choice and imagination. So my role is to kind of distill all of these, the qualities and dispositions that are emerging each year and putting together a multimodal evaluation. So I can come back to that later in the questions. But also as artists and educators, adults, researchers, creative professionals working together, we're also playful in our work. So we're thinking on behalf and with and alongside. So we have the Rabbit Holes Collective working with the BBC, where we're inviting young people to fall down a rabbit hole to connect more deeply to the natural world. So finding the sounds, the roots of the forest, the mycelium network, and deep water listening. And the last project that I want to celebrate is just launched by, with all respect, I'm not a royalist, but Princess Anne, who launched a project at the Royal Society of Arts last month. And the idea of a playful green planet. So we are designing as we are part of nature, working with 100 in Finland, the Eden Project, our university, the charity House for Imagination that I gave over last year, but I'm still working with, and the Project Forest. And so Playful Green Planet is exactly about that, nature connection, community engagement, and creative opportunities for a greener, fairer vision for education. So to end then, and to say thank you, it is above all by the imagination that we achieve perception and compassion and hope. And I hope those qualities and dispositions permeate the education systems of our future generations. So thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Penny. Questions, remarks? Yes, we have Chris.
Don't ask the nature question.
Yes, the nature question.
Bye then.
Far from it, Penny. Can I just congratulate you on a superb presentation? I was awe-inspired by the work that you've done, and although I know of your work, I didn't realise the depth and significance of it. And actually, I had formulated a question as we went through the talk, which you sort of answered, and you may want to say more, I'm all in favour of the way in which you're working in a transdisciplinary way, using art combined with all other areas of learning, and I think that's very much the way forward. And that celebration, I will use the word, that celebration of nature, however you want to define it, and there are lots of definitions of it and lots of questions about it, but however you want to define it, that celebration of nature is great, and that understanding of the natural world. But for me, and I know now for you, the real importance is this critical intersection between understanding the beauty of the natural world and yet our determination, not ours, but humanity's determination to destroy it as rapidly as possible. And I wonder in what way you could give us some insight into which a celebration of the natural world can move into real eco-action so that young people have some hope and courage for a future which, frankly, is very disarming.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I might lean on Naomi as well. It depends whether she wants to speak, but maybe an informal discussion. But I think every day we're manifesting that relationship between hope and action. You know, the space that we're opening up for children and young people to have a dialogue around what they can do together. It's not that the responsibility is on their shoulders. That's the question I asked Kerry the other day. It's about that we're working together as a system, and we're looking at systems change. And I think that we have a group of young people called the Young Green Creators that are working with Naomi's creatives now. And our group are kind of 18 to 25-year-olds, and they've all grown up in the forest. So they've all been to every event, and they live out the kind of philosophy. And now they're taking the action with the young people. My students who worked with me 11 years ago, I employ one of them as the curator. I employ another as the lead designer. And each year we have live projects with the students across the university, but also across the city, working across all the schools. So I think, it is an everyday thing, and the work that Margaret Heffernan has been doing with us, she's just written a beautiful book where she profiles Forest of Imagination in it, called Embracing Uncertainty, and it's how in the face of the ecological crisis, it's urgent. I have a 23-year-old. I'm worried. And I think that in the face of the crisis, we are doing things every day to make a difference, hence the phrase, a million small acts. So it comes back to Joanna Macy's work around hope. So, yeah. And then talk to Naomi at the break. I won't put you on the spot.
We have a question from the far, but not too far end, Katina.
Penny, that was phenomenal. And we're in awe of your life's work. My question is about the children that you've impacted. And students, of course, I'm sure they've been impacted directly and have taken on leadership roles now to impact others in a distributive leadership capacity. What about the children? Do you have any plans to track them into the future to see how those memories from your engagement and public consultation process almost has impacted them as they develop and go into industry and become leaders and share what they learned from those memories that they had as children?
Absolutely, brilliant question. And in fact, that was a focus question. We had a recent creative education, we weren't sure whether to call it creative education roundtable, climate education roundtable, or the other one, cultural education. But Gracie, who's one of the lead young green creators, she chaired it. And it was about how you bring together that kind of journey and how you then tell your story and influence your peers. So over the 24 years of setting up the charity, and before that too, one lovely story is one of the 10-year-olds that came into my care who didn't want to go to school, only wanted to make films and animations. I can say his name, I think. I know I can, because he spoke at university. So Mikey Please, he then went through, he made films and animations about everything. He then went to Camberwell, he went to the Royal College of Art, he then got a BAFTA and an Oscar for his animations, and he's just co-directed Robin with Aardman, just because a team of people just said to him, what would you like to do? What are your ideas? Who do you want to work with? What do you need? And so he led his own inquiries, and then he came to give a talk at our university last year. It's so inspiring for our design and animation students. So I think, yes, if I can get a little bit of funding, I want to go right back to the beginning of this work, and that would be probably my last book, because I think it might take a while.
Beautiful.
Any?
One question.
Sorry.
Potentially just time for one other more.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Penny. It was yesterday we talked about a lot of things in the symposium, and Hannah had a beautiful phrase. She talked about the... Wow.
Maybe you need to
It's
move
me.
or...
It might be me.
Is that better? Okay. She talked about the growing flow of aliveness.
I'm
growing
slightly
flow.
deaf in that ear
Yeah, no, that's
because
all
of the
right.
brain hemorrhage.
The growing flow of aliveness.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, so that made me feel like what you were talking about was about this growing flow of aliveness. My question is about time and leisure and education. Quickly. So you mentioned that you mostly worked part-time, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And and you also work with children out of the education system. The word school comes from schole in Greek, which means, it was a particular, and otium in Latin, which was a particular thing. They work half of the day, and then the other time it was for leisure and contemplation and so on. So my question is, what is your take on the need to for the education system to embrace leisure and time and free time for not only for children out of the school system, but also for a traditional curriculum. So leisure in the education and arts and ecological imagination.
Yeah,
education.
that's a really good question. I'm scanning the room to see if I can see Emily. So yes, I'll give you a short answer because of the time. But two things. So first of all, every child to flourish, no matter what their background or circumstances. And I think children flourishing, human flourishing in the more than human world. Maybe flourishing isn't an easy concept, but I think that relates to a presentation I gave that Emily came to in the House of Commons in Parliament, which was about learning everywhere. So we don't just learn in school, we learn all the time. Think about this week, it's been extraordinary. I'm exhausted in a good way, in a good way. You know, it's been multimodal, transdisciplinary, challenging, critical, reflective. And learning is all the time. So, you know, I've learnt just as much from my daughter, or just as much for going for, I have a green line in my diary every day to go for a walk. You know, it's a discipline as an artist. And I think that's probably where I get my best ideas from. But coming back to the notion of leisure, it should be that learning is in and out of school, in the community, everywhere. And I suppose our other project, which I didn't dwell on, but I can give another talk next year about, is School Without Walls, where we take children out of school for a whole term, and their learning comes from being in the city as a campus for learning. So the concept of leisure and play and time out, and they are just in the world, of the world. And then we listen to their ideas and we co-curate their curriculum. I don't even like the word curriculum. I mean, obviously a lot of our work was inspired by Reggio Emilia, but there's a lovely phrase to end on before I give a shout out for our project with David, Vlad and Pam. But the professor, I can't remember what his official title is, but of learning and teaching at various universities in the UK and in the States, Professor Scott Bolt, he talks about, you know, the child is the curriculum and then the community is the school. So you're blurring all the boundaries between where you're learning. And I think that's where we need to come back to a more post-humanist, new materialist framing for education, where we're asking those better questions. To borrow a phrase from Gert Biester, you know, we are in the world and with the world, of the world. So, and thank you, David, last night for that, and Naomi for that deep conversation. But the concept that we're thinking about with Vlad and Pam and David around an AHRC bid coming up, I had to write it down, David, so you'll laugh at this, but rewilding the collective ecological imagination, looking particularly at interspecies play as a catalyst for enhancing well-being and co-creating climate curricula with young people. So watch this space. Thanks,
we have
everyone.
A very final question, because we started a few minutes late, but yes, final
I'll
question.
make this very quick. And it's just because, of course, what you're saying touches all of us. Of course, nature's at the center of our learning, and it really resonates because it does spark, you said, a lifelong curiosity and desire to learn through the arts, in my case. I'm interested particularly in transdisciplinarity and art and science as domains that are now merging and fusing in such positive and productive ways. And my question's about scaling up. In what you've described today, so much of this started with the nugget of the child's self-directed inquiry. And for those of us who are interested in doing this at the levels of higher education, what's your advice? How would you advise someone to scale this up and breaking down those silos and bringing transdisciplinarity right into the core of the curriculum?
I think the concept of scaling up, Trish, is challenging because obviously we don't want to just kind of marketise and franchise our kind of approach, and that's where I resist models and fixed models. There's so many ways of doing things, and each year we don't know what's going to happen. We co-design it together genuinely with the community. It's authentic. So I suppose what I've been asked to do at Iron University is try out different playful pedagogies with different groups. So we have live projects through all the different schools in the uni, and then we're also looking at as I mentioned in a previous session, multimodal assessment. So we're not starting with grades and marks, we're starting with how my art students, they co-designed exhibitions, films, anthology of poems, etc. And then peer-led assessment with being held by that focus on critical reflection, and AI too, if they choose, but they have to acknowledge that. And I think it's really important that what we're doing is showing what you can do every day in different contexts, whether you're working with children in early years setting or higher education students. And what I try and do is to co-design these immersive spaces of inquiry, these studios of practice that then make visible the creative habits of mind that, you know, we've been talking about all week. So I'm happy to help you.
On this wonderful note, thank you so much, Penny. Once again, thank you. Feel something from us that I hope you appreciate.
Thank you so much. You're amazing. Thank you.